Once, when I was a state police officer in northwestern Montana, I had an unusual experience that I will never forget. Over the years, I encountered many strange situations, but this one stands out. I was sent to a remote homestead to investigate a complaint about property damage and possible theft. This homestead was a cabin deep in the mountains, almost as far as one could go while still having access to a decent road in winter. The couple living there was rather unusual. They were mostly self-sufficient, raising some farm animals and growing much of their own food, which they stored in a root cellar for the winter. It was late fall, and most of the mountain roads were already closed for the season, but I managed to make it to their cabin despite the tricky drive. When I arrived, I only knew that something had happened involving their root cellar, but I waited for them to tell me their story. And what a story it was. It all started the previous summer. They had noticed that food was mysteriously disappearing from their garden. At first, they thought it was the local wildlife, so they built a tall fence around the garden to keep animals out. However, the food continued to vanish. Even though the gardening season had ended, I checked the fence. It was 8 feet tall, and there were no signs of animals getting through or under it. The only way into the garden was through a gate, and the couple insisted they never found the gate unlatched. They put a mesh cover on top of the fence to stop any birds or animals that could climb over. There was no way an animal could get through this fence. Animals eating people's gardens is common here, but it's not usually something you call the police about. After harvesting the garden and moving everything into the root cellar, someone or something started breaking in and taking food from there. This is where things got strange. There were no signs of any animals. No tracks, no droppings. The root cellar door wasn't damaged, but a lot of food was missing. They said almost everything in the root cellar was stored in mason jars of different sizes. The entire jars were gone. Nothing was knocked over or broken, just disappeared. If an animal was stealing the food, we would expect to see jars on the ground and things damaged, but there was none of that. The man just looked at me. I could tell he wanted to say something, but was hesitating. I told him to go ahead and share, assuring him that I had probably heard stranger stories. He told me he had been watching the root cellar through the window every night for the past 2 weeks, and he finally saw the thief. He said it was a human, but not a normal human. He didn't know whether to call the police or fish and wildlife. I asked him to tell me more about what he saw. He explained that the thief came to the cellar just after dark, and it was definitely a person. The lack of outside lights made it difficult to see clearly, but he went outside to confront the thief and scare him away. He met the thief coming out of the cellar, carrying a leather bag full of mason jars. The man described the thief as human, but not like us. He had a large brow ridge and deep-set eyes. His face and body were square-shaped, and he was only about 5 feet tall. He was wearing boots and clothes made from fur and animal hide. The man said it was like looking at someone from a prehistoric history book. He shouted at the thief, who then ran toward the forest. But before disappearing into the trees, the thief reached into his bag and tried to hand the man something. The man didn't take it, so the thief dropped it on the ground and ran away. He followed the thief to the edge of the forest, but it was too dark to try to track him any further. He returned to the root cellar to see what had been taken. Then he remembered the object the thief had dropped. Looking around on the ground, he found arrowheads, spear points, and a couple of other stone tools. I was puzzled about what to do with this case. I took the arrowheads as evidence, but I didn't have anything else to go on. There was no trail in the forest to even attempt to track the thief. I was honest with the couple. I told them there wasn't much I could do. They asked if anyone else in the area had seen these strange people. The man was convinced that there were cave people living in the mountains, completely isolated from the rest of society. He wasn't sure if they were a different species of human or not, but he thought they might be the reason for all the Bigfoot stories in the area. I didn't know what to believe. I never saw the thief myself. I did, however, follow up with the couple in the spring. When I arrived, they were both working in the garden, which had been expanded quite a bit. They told me they hadn't had any more problems. As I walked back to my vehicle, I glanced at the root cellar. The door now had a display of arrowheads along the top that wasn't there last fall. I didn't ask any more questions. Looking back, I wish I had, but at the same time, I'm not sure I was ready to know what exactly lives out there in the mountains. After discovering your show, I began to think that the thing I saw might have been something paranormal. It didn't seem like a regular animal, and it certainly wasn't just a sick creature. I never expected to experience anything like that, but sometimes unexpected things happen. Around 10 years ago, I spent most of my time in the wilderness. I worked as a ranger in the Bridger-Teton National Forest. My job involved spending a lot of time on horseback, managing the Teton Wilderness area. This area is almost 600,000 acres of wild land, and the best way to take care of it was by using horses. The wilderness is very wet, with many rivers and creeks that we had to cross regularly. One day I was riding my horse along the river, heading to a spot where we were working on fixing a trail. The trail was familiar to us and one of our favorites. My horse especially loved this path. The area had many natural obstacles like fallen logs that we could jump over, which made it a great workout for the horses. Plus, my horse enjoyed splashing in the stream we often crossed. My horse was a spirited mare, always full of energy and very aware of her surroundings. She was usually very alert and curious about everything around her. But on that particular day, something felt different. Instead of her usual spirited behavior, she seemed more anxious and uneasy. She kept dancing around and didn't want to move forward. It was clear that something had caught her attention, something she didn't like at all. I looked around but couldn't see anything unusual between the trees. There were no strange sounds or smells that I could detect. Despite this, my horse remained restless, clearly sensing something that I couldn't perceive. Horses have incredibly sharp senses, often noticing things humans might miss. I thought maybe there were people walking nearby or an animal hiding in the trees. I tried to encourage my mare to keep moving, but she refused. Instead, she stayed in one place, nervously prancing and trying to turn around as if she wanted to go back the way we came. Suddenly, she froze completely. I could feel every muscle in her body tense up, and she started trembling. She was on high alert, ready to run at any moment. She stood tall with her head up, ears perked forward, nostrils wide open, and she kept snorting nervously. Then, out of nowhere, something darted out in front of us. Suddenly, it dashed out on all fours and halted right in the middle of the trail. Then, surprisingly, it stood upright on its hind legs and stared directly at us. It was only about 20 feet away. I hadn't sensed anything lurking in the trees beforehand. Yet when it leaped into view, I felt an immediate sense of fear. What we saw didn't look like any animal or person. Even though it had a shape similar to a human, it moved like an animal with its hands and feet flat on the ground. Its arms were unusually long and thin. It was so skinny that it seemed impossible for it to be a human. Its head seemed wider than its waist. The creature didn't have any hair that I could see, and its skin was a grayish-brown color that made it blend in with the forest surroundings. Everything about the creature seemed stretched out, like its fingers and toes were unusually long. When it stood up, it towered above us. It stood nearly eye to eye with my horse. I couldn't see its facial features clearly from where I was, either because of the distance or because it didn't have distinct features. I do remember its large black eyes staring right at us. I imagined its skin would feel rough to the touch. It didn't look smooth, but it wasn't exactly scaly either. The creature stood as if it was ready to pounce. I got a good but quick look at it. Suddenly, my horse spun around and took off in a gallop, racing back up the trail from a standstill. I was so surprised and scared that I didn't try to stop her. I think I even urged her on, holding on tightly. I don't think the creature followed us, though I was too scared to look back and check. My horse galloped as if something terrible was chasing her. Only when we reached the trailhead, where there were other people, did she finally stop. I wouldn't have been able to stop her even if I had tried. The people at the trailhead stared at us in surprise as we burst out of the trail like that. Even though my horse seemed to think we were safe now, she kept looking back towards the trail, wide-eyed and snorting nervously. I couldn't tell if the creature was still lurking in the trees or not. After the encounter, I managed to guide my horse back towards the stable. It was tough to calm her down. She seemed stunned by what had happened. To help her relax, we trotted in the opposite direction for quite a while, burning off her nervous energy. Later, my boss kept suggesting it might have been a deer with a disease called chronic wasting disease. If you hadn't seen the creature yourself, it would be hard to believe. I'm still not sure what to think about it. I try not to dwell on it too much. Even writing about it now makes me feel uneasy. It's strange how I had never seen anything like that before, and then suddenly it appeared right in front of me. In the weeks that followed, things slowly started to feel more normal again, but I believe both my horse and I were deeply affected by that experience. We both seemed to have lasting stress from it. Between 1949 and 1969, the United States military tested 239 different biological agents in the open air over cities like San Francisco, New York, and Panama City. This isn't a secret or a made-up story. It's something the United States government has admitted. In 1994, something strange happened again. You might not believe it, but for me, it's true. And then again in 2008. Let's talk about 1994 in Oakville, Washington. This year is important because something really weird happened there, and then strangely similar things happened 14 years later. For 3 whole weeks, a strange jelly-like substance fell from the sky. It made people sick. Nobody knew where it came from. Local scientists tried to study the stuff that fell from the sky, but the samples they collected suddenly disappeared. This isn't just a made-up story, it's another true fact. I've looked into this a lot. If you know something I don't, something that could explain what happened to me, please tell me. Maybe there's something I haven't learned yet. In the summer of 2008, I was living in Camas, Utah. It's a quiet place with beautiful scenery all around. For 3 weeks that summer, something strange happened in Camas. We had that same unusual rain, but this time, not many people talked about it. I remember driving across town one day when the rain started. It fell on my windshield like thick drops of spoiled milk. I didn't understand what was happening then. I didn't know much about this kind of thing back then. When I turned on my windshield wipers, the white substance just smeared all over the glass. I had to stop my car and scrape the slimy goo off my windshield with my hands. I wrapped an old cloth around my palm and fingers so I wouldn't touch the strange substance directly. But even that wasn't enough. I still got sick. Many people in Camas, Utah fell ill that month, mostly infections. A lot of us had problems in our lungs. Some had it in their blood. Some of our animals got sick too, and some families' lives were changed forever. It was a new thing for us, but sadly it wasn't the first time they tried to hide something like this. The next time it rained, I collected some of the jelly-like substance in a mason jar. I wanted to have proof of what was going on. I took it to the local hospital to get it tested. I thought that if the hospital had a sample, they could better help all of us who were feeling sick. I think I was right about that. But things didn't go as planned. There were men from the FBI at the hospital. They were wearing black suits and sunglasses. It seemed like they were waiting for someone to bring in a sample, because as soon as I handed it over, they cornered me in a hospital room and started asking me lots of questions. After what felt like a long time answering their questions, I finally got out of that room. But when I asked about the sample, the hospital told me it was gone. They said they didn't know where it went. I think the FBI took it from me. They must have thought it was important. After that, I made a mistake. I decided to go to the news, but they wouldn't listen to me anyway. It was the middle of the Summer Olympics, and people outside of Camas didn't want to talk about anything else. Toxic rain wasn't something they cared about, but I never got the chance to find out. The FBI found me there. They were waiting again. Now, when I think back, I wonder how many other people in Camas tried to tell someone else about what was happening. I wonder how many of them were followed like I was. This time, they took me into a van and talked very seriously to me. They made me believe that if I told anyone what was happening in my hometown, it would cause a lot of fear and worry. I didn't really agree with them, but I didn't feel like I could argue. Plus, they said I could go to jail if I didn't do what they told me. That was enough to make me stop talking about it. After that, they drove me back home. They even walked me to my bed. When I woke up the next morning, I was relieved to find they were gone. My car was in the driveway, which was strange because I still had the keys in my pocket. Gradually, things went back to normal. The strange rain stopped. The goo either dried up or got washed away when a big storm came through. The strange event in Camas stayed on my mind. When I read about what happened in Oakville in 1994, I couldn't ignore the similarities. In Oakville, someone got to study the jelly-like substance. They said it was made by people. I wondered if that's what happened in Camas, too. Did the government purposely let something out over our town that year? How did they stop it from spreading? I didn't talk about it for a long time. I felt like I had no choice. I didn't see any other stories about the strange white stuff either. I thought the government had learned from their mistakes. They couldn't just test things on us without anyone noticing. Then I saw something in the news last year. In 2022, in Passaic, New Jersey, Hughes Lake turned completely white because of something that flowed into it from a nearby river. This time the government didn't do much about it. They just said it wasn't dangerous. They said the river and the lake didn't touch the drinking water in the town. They said a few things to make people feel better, and everyone stopped asking questions. But I knew that substance. I could see it was the same jelly I found, this time poured into a river instead of falling from the sky. Sure enough, just 6 months later, Passaic started having a lot of lung infections. It has to be connected, right? It's too easy to believe. There are too many things that match up. Maybe they're trying out something new, something that takes longer to show up. What do you think they're going to do with it? Several months ago, something strange started happening in my life. I live on the north shore of Long Island with my girlfriend and our 2 golden retrievers. We're in a quiet, secluded area with hardly any neighbors around. I'm 28 years old and work mostly from home, only occasionally heading into the city for office meetings. My girlfriend works nights, so I got into the habit of staying up late to spend more time with her during the day. Around 4 months back, things took a bizarre turn. Almost every week, strange things started occurring in our house. It was like our home had a mind of its own. The lights would flicker unexpectedly, sometimes getting way too bright for no reason. My TV would turn on by itself and switch to a channel that just showed static, no matter how many times I tried to change it. Even my alarm clock, which doubled as a radio, would start scanning through different stations on its own, ending up with nothing but that eerie static noise. The first few times this happened, I was really scared. Being home alone with all my electronics acting on their own was really spooky. I thought maybe there was a ghost or something in the house. When I unplugged the TV and radio, it helped a little, but the lights still flickered, and sometimes my car would start by itself in the garage. But nothing bad ever came from it. It wasn't like in the movies where furniture flies around, or in scary stories where people get dragged around by ghosts. It just kept happening, and somehow I got used to it. What else could I do? It never seemed to happen when my girlfriend was home, and when I tried to show her videos on my phone, she thought I was just playing a trick on her. After a few weeks of this, something else strange happened. It was a normal Wednesday night. My girlfriend was at work for another 6 hours. Around 1 a.m., all my electronics started acting crazy, but this time it was worse than before. My laptop began opening web pages by itself. Google, news sites, and social media all popping up rapidly. This was something new and scary, so I quickly shut it down using the side button. At the same time, the lights in every room suddenly got super bright, and I heard a light bulb break in the bathroom. Meanwhile, both TVs in the house were blaring that awful static noise at full blast. I was really scared and started to panic. I ran downstairs into the living room and out through the back door onto my deck. As I flung the door open and dashed outside, I felt like I was surrounded by a bright blue light. It was so intense that for a moment, I felt like I was floating away from my body. Then, everything went black. When I woke up, I could barely open my eyes because the sunlight was so bright. It must have been late afternoon. I realized I was lying in the grass and my clothes were soaked with sweat. As I tried to get up, a strong wave of sickness and pain hit me hard. I lay down for a while until I could finally stand and figure out where I was. I found myself in a clearing I knew about a quarter-mile from my house. It was a struggle to walk home, with a pounding headache and feeling like I might throw up. When I stumbled up the driveway, my girlfriend rushed out to help me. I could hear both worry and frustration in her voice as she guided me inside and up the stairs. I had been gone for about 12 hours. My girlfriend had called me many times that night, but I didn't answer. When she got home, she couldn't find me anywhere. Just my phone, keys, and wallet on the kitchen table where I left them. She said she even filed a report with the police, who promised to look for me, but 12 hours isn't very long to be missing. She explained all this to me, but all I wanted to do was sleep. I managed to eat some toast and drink water before crawling into bed, exhausted and still feeling sick. But that sleep, and everyone since, hasn't been restful. Every time I close my eyes, I see the same thing. I call it a vision because it doesn't feel like a regular dream. It's too clear and real. I can see and hear everything, and it never changes. I find myself in a room that's all white, with clear walls and floors. I can't see anyone else's body, but I know they're there. In front of me stands a slim figure in a gray outfit that covers them from head to toe. This figure always delivers the same message, but when I wake up, I can't remember all of it. Each time I feel scared and can't quite piece together what the figure said. Next to my bed, I keep a journal where I write down the first thing I remember from each time. So far, I've written down 2028, God's Earth, Rebirth, Union, Awakening. It all sounds really strange, and even my girlfriend doesn't believe me. She keeps asking me to see a therapist, and I think I will, just to make her feel better. If anyone out there knows what this could mean or has gone through something similar, please tell me. I want to know that I'm not alone in this. Once upon a time, I used to look after a big building in downtown Houston. It had lots of offices that different businesses rented. My job was to make sure everything ran smoothly, like checking on the cleaning and talking to the people who rented the offices. Most floors were always full, except for one problem floor, the 4th floor. It seemed like nobody wanted to stay there for long. Even though some people might say floors like the 13th are unlucky, this building only went up to 9 floors. One fall, just as the leaves were changing colors, another tenant left the 4th floor early. They were supposed to be out by the 15th, and it was my job to make sure they followed the rules. This was important because we needed new people to move in quickly. Adding to my troubles, our cleaning guy kept forgetting to close doors properly after sneaking out for a smoke break. And downtown Houston in the 90s meant I was always chasing teenagers away. It was pretty annoying. One night after the janitors finished and I checked everything, I walked across the parking lot towards my car. As I looked up from my keys, I noticed a light was on. It was on the 4th floor, of course. I might have said a few not-so-nice words under my breath. After spending several nights that month chasing people out, I really wasn't in the mood for more problems. But I knew I had to go back inside and check. So I went back into the building and took the elevator up to the 4th floor. Usually, I would start from the top and work my way down to check everything, but I was too annoyed to bother. The light was on the 4th floor, so that's where I went. When I got there, all the lights were on, but I couldn't see anyone around. The previous renters had taken all their furniture, but some cubicles and phones still belonged to the building. The weird part was all the phones were lying on the floor exactly where they used to sit on desks. It was like a ghostly outline of the office layout. I went from office to office, making noise to see if anyone was hiding, but there was nobody there. Normally, I would have checked the whole building again, but as I said before, I was not in the mood. After making sure the floor was empty, I turned off the lights and headed back to the elevator. I pressed the button and stood there, feeling frustrated. Then suddenly, I felt like I wasn't alone anymore. I turned around and saw a man walking out of one of the offices at the end of the hallway. He was dressed like he stepped out of an old movie from the 1950s, with a suit, tie, and a fedora. He walked to the center of the room and stopped facing me. That's when I started yelling at him every name I could think of. I stormed towards him, but he just walked slowly towards me, looking calm. His calmness made me even angrier. But then, something in my brain started to feel uneasy. The whole floor was dark, but he stepped into a beam of light from the parking lot, and that's when I saw it. He had no face. I started backing away slowly. I wasn't going to turn my back on this, whatever he was. The elevator doors opened and closed while I kept yelling at him. I reached back to press the button, hoping the elevator hadn't gone back down to the lobby. He kept coming closer, and just when he was about 15 feet away, every phone in the building started ringing. Even the ones that weren't plugged in. I thought I was going to have a heart attack. The doors behind me opened, and I stepped backwards into the light of the elevator. I pressed the close doors button as fast as I could. The man kept walking towards me, but the doors closed just in time. I ran across the lobby, locked the doors, and jumped into my car. We found a new tenant for the 4th floor a few days later, and they moved in before the end of the month. I don't know if they stayed long because I quit my job shortly after that night.